Well, I'm delighted to have an amazing individual with us today. Warren Cass, who's famous for his thought leadership course that I'm actually on myself. So I'm delighted to welcome Warren with me today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about B2B influencers and the growth that that has had over the last, number of years, but more recently too. So Warren, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and a little bit about your background, just for our listeners.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me today, Gordon. Lovely to join you here. It's been wonderful working with you over the last couple of months. Really has, just to get to know you a bit better, because we date back actually at least 5-10 years. I can't remember the first time you booked me to speak, and I think it was Rico Stadium.
It was
that
it
very
was.
first time.
Yeah.
So it was good to start getting to know you then, but more recently, really good to get to know you better. And I've forgotten the question, just to start us on an amusing foot.
So yes, tell us a little bit about your background and your journey. What have you been doing? Because I know you've written a book. I know you've spoken at events that I've booked at, but also all around the world, haven't you?
Well, so the quick potted history is for the last 30 years, I've been running my own businesses, and one particular business kind of because we were running business events, there was a necessity for me to host and stand at the front of the room, which I found I particularly enjoyed. And more and more as time went on, I was actually being asked for my opinion and my thoughts on things, which progressed into a speaking career. And I kind of found myself being offered money to stand up and speak at other people's events, which was back then fascinating and flattering and all of those things. So I started saying yes a lot more. And but I played at it for many years. And more recently, by recently, I mean, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I started to get offered some serious fees for speaking. I was asked to write a book by 2 different publishers, and that kind of led me down the kind of thought leadership path a lot more seriously. And from the point of view that rather than just treating it as casually as I had, I started to look at what world-class speakers looked like and how they presented themselves from a personal brand, the consistency with their visuals in that kind of visual expression, and looking at how their stagecraft, the amount they used humor in their talks, what their marketing was like. So it took me down this whole journey of being fascinated by people who were fantastic orators and had managed to kind of turn themselves into kind of world-renowned, world-class speakers. And I started to do the little things to improve the individual aspects of my speaking, from signing up for comedy courses, acting courses. I enrolled on the Adobe suite so I could be better with InDesign and Illustrator and Photoshop, so I could create better visuals and a better personal brand. And that whole journey took several years. But in that time, of course, the book was released and did very well, and created a lot of opportunity, which was fantastic. And I find myself in the last 2 years working with lots of other speakers who want to kind of replicate what I learned and what I implemented and some of the successes. And more recently in this last year, working with Warren Knight on the Thought Leaders Blueprint, which has been probably the most purposeful part of my career to date. I say probably, definitely the most purposeful part of my career to date, because what we get to do is hang out with people who've got ideas and want to make some sort of difference to their marketplace. And that's hugely satisfying.
Mm. And what is it particularly though that has resonated with you? Because you are working with an amazing bunch of people that have probably found the lockdown and COVID situation a big change for them. They're not in front of big audiences, and I know a lot of them have found that they've had to really pivot and change the way that they do things. So, what would your advice be to some people thinking about this?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the change that's happened globally based on COVID-19 isn't restricted to any one industry. I see so many people wanting to take ownership of the problem, as in they're the ones most affected. You know, I recognize that for the people I work with, their traditional way of earning money, i.e. Being paid to stand up on a stage and speak, when those events aren't taking place, they're affected. So are many other industries. And what's interesting in the times we find ourselves in, speakers I've known for years are falling by the wayside. Some are just choosing to retire. I've seen a couple of those recently. Some are choosing to get a full-time job. And I would imagine they're quite employable based on their kind of knowledge or expertise, but they're choosing to go down that line. So it really is varied, the response, but like any industry right now, we've got to have the flexibility, the agility to recalibrate and to adapt, because to just carry on doing what we've always done in a time when events are being cancelled is a fool's errand. So so you asked the question, what is it I particularly enjoy about this? I enjoy working with people who still have optimism, who are still looking at the way they reinvent themselves, recalibrate, and understand that if the market's shifting, thought leadership really is about a personal or business demonstrating authority on a relevant subject by answering the biggest questions on the minds of their audience. And in these current times, the biggest questions on the minds of their audience have changed. So thought leadership, by that very definition, has to adapt and has to be constantly looking to source and share useful information which helps in these current times. They're the people who are lasting. And there's a load of different ways in which you can deliver that. Not just from a delivery point of view, but commercially too, right? And so helping people understand, you know, how we adapt to, you know, virtual sharing of information, how we get better at our digital products, how we improve our content marketing and our content thought leadership. All of these are just some of the aspects that we talk to people about. But if I was to answer your second part of the question, which is the best advice for doing this, I think thought leadership isn't just reserved for those who are pioneers on a subject. It's really anybody who's answering the questions of their marketplace and being useful. So there's two things I would say. The first thing is to consider actually taking it more seriously from a personal branding point of view. I see a lot of inconsistent people out there who aren't really centering their personal brand, understanding where their values are, understanding, you know, using their testimony and their kind of evidence-based stuff on their experiences, qualifications, etc., to paint a narrative that says, I really know my onions, come and listen to what I've got to say. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say, and my good friend, another thought leader, good friend Barnaby Winter, was talking to me about this over a bottle of wine before lockdown. And it was based on research that came out of Gartner, which was around the fact that the marketplace is flooded with insight right now. And the people who are really winning aren't the people who are delivering insight, it's the people who are making sense of insight. So it's how do we actually take this wisdom and implement it? How do we actually make it useful to us? And what's happening is people are slightly overwhelmed by information and skeptical because the amount of misinformation, and what they actually want is somebody to hold their hand and do it with them. And so I see a real trend towards products and services which are a little bit more hands-on and helping people make sense of insight.
And put it better myself, I absolutely, and of course I know Barnaby as well, and I do agree with you. In fact, I was speaking to a group of chief execs the other night around almost Zoom fatigue. How do we make events more interesting online? As another issue and challenge for some of those speakers, because they're not connecting with their audience in the same way that they may have done in the past. You can't always see that body language, can you, when you've got 30 or 40 people or even more on a screen? So being able to be engaging and different, and also using technology in a different way. Of course, some great stuff out there now that enables us to be a bit more creative in the way we present ourselves.
And we've already seen incredible innovation over the last 9 months when it comes uh, to the kind of visual stuff that we do to make Zoom more interesting, for example. In fact, yesterday I signed up to the beta of a new app called It's actually spelt, I think, triple M, triple
Is
H,
that right?
triple M.
Is
So
that
it's
right?
And it's a little bit like OBS, but it allows you to do some really kind of groovy, interesting stuff whilst being on a Zoom call, for example, to be able to include visuals and include a little bit more emotional, a little bit more engaging style. So I'm looking forward to those innovations, because I don't think they're working in isolation. I think you're going to find a whole suite of products coming out which are about just making these types of conversations really visually interesting too.
Yeah. So, I mean, just on the back of that, of course, nowadays I've noticed that some of the traditional speakers have now pivoted and changed the wording on their LinkedIn profiles, Twitter profiles to virtual speaker. And now it's not in the same as other forms of influencer marketing. It's now not just about the content; it's how it's being delivered in a way that really does resonate. So we've certainly seen quite a lot of that, and I think we're going to see more of that. Would you concur?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And of course, they quite rightly should be including virtual speaking on their bios, because of course that's what people are searching for. I mean, the events industry hasn't just gone away completely, but they have tried to adapt. Now, it's a much harder task for certain types of events. So, for example, an event I regularly speak at in London has about 25,000 people turn up, and it's a big part of it's an exhibition. And doing an expo online just isn't the same. So it's a really difficult task to try and get engagement for that type, particularly if the exhibition was the commercial aspect of the event, the thing that paid for everything else. Whereas information events are still largely able to command a fee for an attendee and therefore pay a fee for the speaker. And so whilst that's happening, and sure, some people are trying to negotiate slight reductions in fees, remember a lot of the big overheads connected to the event, all the travel, accommodation, logistics, are no longer a huge expense. So and actually in some cases the attendance is higher because they're attracting a more international audience. I mean, even just with what Warren and I have done this year, when we originally sat down and conceived it, it was before any kind of idea of lockdown, right at the beginning of the year. And of course, what we were going to do at the time was take a nice 5-star venue and bring people together for the content. And lockdown happened, so we had to adapt. And as a result of that, we've got people in, I think, 7 different countries now participating in some of the stuff that we do. And that would have never have happened had it have been a physical event. So it does broaden the opportunity. I mean, and even if you just look in the last week, I've taken part in a summit in India. I'm involved in an event in Australia tomorrow night. So there's lots of different opportunities coming up virtually, and the marketplace is starting to normalize a little bit in that fees are starting to be generated because people are understanding how they can make virtual events commercially work.
Mm-hmm. So in your estimation, how can brand work more with thought leaders and what we call B2B influencers? What are the sorts of things so for example, if I'm a financial brand, a bank or an insurance company or a tech company, how can I really work with one of these individuals successfully, in your opinion?
So it's interesting. I've actually been in this space in one way, shape or form for quite a few years now, certainly in the B2B sector. So an organization I founded back in 2004 worked a lot with sponsors. So we had huge brands who sponsored us, and every single one of them for different reasons, but in the mechanics of it. But essentially what they all wanted was more eyeballs from the small business marketplace. And some of them back then, it was insight they wanted to share as part of their sponsorship agreement. Some just wanted to turn up at events and talk to our audience. But long gone are the days of just logo placement, for these types of things. What people realize is that they have to add value in order to get engagement. And when working with influencers, and it's probably just worth distinguishing between what a consumer influencer is versus a thought leader, because most people think of influencers as just the content creators, more entertainment content creators. It's the Kardashians and the likes of this world. Whereas thought leaders are people who are typically bringing ideas to the marketplace. And yes, they still have to be influencers. They've still got a following. They've still got influence over their following. And it's largely based on their content, but their content is in the idea marketplace as opposed to the entertainment marketplace. That's how I kind of distinguish the two. And there's room for both, really, even in the B2B space. I remember BlackBerry back in 2007, who created what they called their ambassador scheme. And I was one of them, but they had people who were prominent in lots and lots of different industries, and they were given lots of perks and rewards for standing up occasionally and saying, "I love my BlackBerry" type thing, But that was even though it was in the B2B space, that was traditional influencing. That's what we know as influencers today. There was no content coming from us. It was the credibility by association principle, which I talk about in my book. Whereas when it comes to thought leadership, the Enlightened brand isn't just working with B2B influencers, even though it's a great strategy. They're also starting to think about how they share thought leadership themselves. And really, really exciting brands normally have an evangelist at the helm who's happy to stand up and actually talk and educate the marketplace around them. But even absent of that, they can do it as a brand. They don't necessarily have to do it with an individual at the helm. They can do it as a brand. And the whole point is about, again, coming back to the point I made earlier on, it's demonstrating authority on relevant subjects by answering the biggest questions on the minds of their audience.
And I think people are following individuals more than they are brands now. And this is, I think, the COVID has made our connections a lot more human to human, haven't they? We're resonating and feeling solace with individuals rather than we are with traditional forms of advertising, which I think is why influencer marketing growing so exponentially. And so, of course, is thought leadership. Because what brands want is they want their brand story told through advocates.
That's true. And, I don't know very many people who have a meaningful conversation with the brand. It's the individuals within the organizations, even if it is meaningful. So, but there's a trust thing for big organizations. It's how do you trust the people who represent you to say the right things and do the right things if they've not gone through any kind of formal media training, for example. And even through social media now, you're starting to see personality coming through. People are empowered to be a little bit more human. And, in lots and lots of different cultures, actually, the human bit comes before the business bit. It's only really in some of the Western countries where the business transaction takes place before the relationship is built. But in China, for example, there's a principle called guanxi, which is all about building those relationships first, and even on a family level, because what they want to do is understand what people stand for from a values point of view, before they would even think about taking business to the next step. And we're certainly starting to see that trend, I believe, percolating throughout the West. And it's why when we're working with thought leaders, we put a bit of emphasis on getting the value stuff right and actually designing the personal brand and being consistent with it, so you are known and trusted quantity. It's when people are unpredictable that then there are surprises, and they tend to polarize a lot more. But there is a design structure you can go through when creating a personal brand for maximum effectiveness and maximum impact. And that's what we try to take people through with our Thought Leaders Blueprint.
And what do you think are some of the things that have come out of the Thought Leaders Blueprint that surprised you? Because I know when you started putting this course and content together, uh, it's changed from the first one that you did to the second one. So I'm quite interested to find out what your findings were, what type of messages that you were creating that was resonating differently.
So again, there's two great questions within that. So I'll answer the question first on what appeared to be resonating. I think because Warren and I practice what we preach, and we're quite open about what works and what doesn't. I think there's a bit of vulnerability on our part, which I think draws people in. But largely we are able to, really honestly look at the marketplace and help people navigate that. Look at the change and help people navigate that. So we've had people come to us because actually what they wanted was clarity more than anything else. In fact, I think clarity is probably the biggest word that people maybe come to us for, but it's not why they stay a part of the community. But they stay part of the community because they've got suddenly a support infrastructure which goes above and beyond with them. I mean, the connection between our members is phenomenal. There's real trust and support. It's meaningful, really meaningful conversations. They've all engaged. I can't wait for the first time we can bring everybody together physically, face to face, for a conference, and break bread together. It's just going to be an amazing time. But the reason why they come, I think, is for clarity. And the clarity isn't just about how the marketplace is shifting and how they can adapt. They're coming to us for the clarity of who they are and how they best portray themselves moving forwards. So they're typically attracted to our early stuff. We run an identity workshop which looks at how they can really build a compelling personal brand. And then of course we get into the space of what's the kind of content marketing strategy, how do they use and build a digital leadership strategy, what's their kind of propositions, are they building a methodology or a model which differentiates themselves from their competition. We go through all of these as part of the program, and I think it's an eye-opener for many. And there's a common reason for that. If you think about most people in business, I pretty much guarantee that the vast majority of them, after say 10 years of running a business, aren't delivering what they set out to deliver. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but the main reason is the marketplace dictates what you offer as a business, really. If they don't want it, they won't buy it and you won't last. And if they want something slightly different, you adapt and you evolve. And that's something I've consistently seen in lots and lots of different industries, by the way, not just thought leadership. But of course, they have to resonate with you. So you have to have given all of that authority and that useful interaction. You have to have demonstrated your values to a certain extent. They've got to trust you. In an age of so much noise and so much misinformation, people are doing their due diligence. People are really checking out the people they might decide to work with, and therefore, managing your reputation is important. Having strategies for that too, having strategies that raise your profile. All of those are essential if you're building a brand which is led by thought leadership.
And sometimes don't you find that, and I can bear this out from people that I've met, we can all be great supporters and advisors to other people, but don't look introspectively often enough at ourselves, particularly if you're a coach or a speaker or you're working on your own. So I think this form of clarity and hot seat environment that you've created, I think is really quite interesting, because it's not just about saying you're going to do something. You are you're being measured, but not in a embarrassing way, in a way that you owe it to the group. So I actually think this is it should be quite a good time for strategists and coaches to actually help businesses all around the world with fine-tuning their own vision. because what COVID has done has knocked a lot of people off balance, hasn't it?
Well, you've also made a really good point there, is that most people are awesome at what they do because they've probably been doing it for years. But
Mm,
that doesn't mean to say they necessarily know how to run the business framework around it, or they know how to market that thing, whatever it might be, or position that thing. Okay, so they know how to do it. They know where their value comes from. They may have even been employed to do it on somebody else's behalf for the last 20 years. But suddenly now, in this new world, they've got to go and feather their own cap. And what we do is we give them the business vehicle for it, the understanding of how to articulate their proposition and take it to market.
super. If you could just leave us with one final tip from all your years of experience, um, what would it be to create a proper thought leader?
Well, actually, this is broader, this tip then. This is every single business right now. We are living in times of enormous change. And the businesses that thrive in change are the ones that are always looking at what's happening to the marketplace around them and understanding how they might adapt. There's a quote I've always liked, which is often falsely attributed to Charles Darwin, which is, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most adaptable to change." And I believe that to be absolutely true for the business landscape today. We've got to be constantly looking at what evolutions are happening with technology, with demography, and we've got to be understanding how our marketplace is shifting and making sure that we're staying relevant.
Warren Cass, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Gordon.